The man who tried to let go of everything spent his life haunted by what he was running from. Leo Tolstoy was born in 1828 into the comfort of Russian aristocracy. On the surface, he had it all: money, privilege, a grand estate. But beneath that inherited wealth, his early years were shaped by a pattern of loss and emotional absence. His mother died when he was just 9, followed shortly by his father. Raised by distant relatives, young Tolstoy grew up with a full plate and an empty heart. The stability everyone else assumed he had was, for him, just an illusion. This early emotional famine left a mark deeper than wealth could ever fill. While other young nobles indulged in their status, Tolstoy questioned it all. Could meaning be bought? Was happiness truly hiding inside gilded rooms and banquet halls? The grief of childhood slowly morphed into the spiritual agitation of youth. He wasn't content to merely exist behind palace walls. He needed purpose, something real, something earned. But before becoming the bearded sage who preached simplicity, Tolstoy tasted the full spectrum of worldly pleasures. In his younger years, he partied, gambled, traveled, even dueled for honor. He flirted with danger and drowned in indulgence. Yet after every thrill, he woke up emptier than before. The highs faded quickly. What lingered was a hangover of the soul. Then came war. The brutality of the Crimean battlefield shattered any romantic illusions he still held. There, he saw death up close, raw, messy, human. He watched peasants suffer, soldiers break, and dignity erode. And for the first time, he couldn't look away. This wasn't some abstract injustice. It was personal. It was inescapable. A fire was lit inside him, the conviction that the world was broken, and that he needed to understand why. Returning home, Tolstoy began to write. His novels, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, brought him global fame and immense fortune. But the recognition only deepened his crisis. If success felt so empty, then what was it all for? What's the point of climbing to the top if, at the summit, you're still staring into the same dark sky? Even as a husband and father, surrounded by love and legacy, something was missing. Philosophy, religion, literature. He devoured them all in search of certainty. But no ideology could silence the question pounding inside his chest. Why do I still feel lost? So he made a decision that would shock his family and followers. To walk away from the games of prestige and return to something raw. Drawn to early Christian ideals and thinkers like Rousseau, he became obsessed with shedding materialism and embracing the purity of a peasant's life. In his eyes, wealth was a gilded cage, society a performance. But idealism has a cost, and Tolstoy was about to find out just how steep it could be. If wealth doesn't bring peace, will poverty? Tolstoy was determined to find out. By the time Leo Tolstoy had become a household name, admired across continents, studied in salons and universities, he was already suffocating under the very success he had once chased. Fame, he realized, was just another illusion. The praise, the applause, the elegant rooms filled with intellectuals. It all felt hollow. Something in him had shifted. The noise of the world no longer reached him the same way. What once seemed fulfilling now tasted like ash. While others saw a genius at the height of his glory, Tolstoy saw a prisoner behind velvet curtains. His soul had begun whispering what his intellect could no longer ignore, that truth doesn't reside in status or bookshelves, but in the quiet dignity of simplicity. He became obsessed with the idea that to reclaim his humanity and undergo a true spiritual awakening, he needed to tear down everything he had built. Drawing inspiration from early Christianity and the writings of Rousseau, Tolstoy turned inward. He began to see the life of peasants, not as a tragedy to be escaped, but as a mirror reflecting a more authentic path. Manual labor, humble meals, bare feet on cold soil. He romanticized it all, not out of naivety, but out of desperation. He needed to believe there was another way to live, one that wasn't corrupted by ego, money, or applause. So he started letting go. He gave up fine clothing, choosing instead to wear peasant garments. He denounced property ownership, calling it a moral injustice. "How can one man own the land," he wrote, "when we are all born from it and return to it. These weren't just ideas for him. They were declarations of war against the version of himself that had once craved prestige. His letters and essays took on the tone of prophecy. Many began to see him not just as a writer, but as a moral compass in a society unraveling. But the paradox was brutal. He still lived in a massive estate. He still had servants, horses, and a wife who didn't share his vision. Sophia, the woman who had once been his closest partner, couldn't comprehend his transformation. To her, this wasn't liberation. It was madness. They had children, responsibilities, a legacy to preserve. And here was Tolstoy, talking about giving away his copyrights, surrendering his fortune, abandoning everything they had built. Yet Tolstoy's inner fire only grew. He began funding schools for rural children, writing pamphlets against materialism, advocating for non-violence, vegetarianism, and self-reliance. He saw in these acts the seeds of a new humanity, one not bound by religion, nationality, or class. This, to him, was the real revolution, not political, but existential, not in the streets, but within the soul. It was, unmistakably, a call to spiritual awakening. And still, the tension lingered. He preached the renunciation of wealth while his books continued to sell worldwide. He spoke of humility while being praised as a sage. He tried to detach from ego, yet found himself increasingly idolized. The more he rejected the world, the more it pulled him in. Even in solitude, he couldn't escape his reflection. He wanted to be anonymous, but his name had become larger than his message. His life was a contradiction unfolding in slow motion, a man chasing purity through the chaos of his own legend. For every step he took toward detachment, reality dragged him back too. The deeper question began to gnaw at him. Could one truly escape the world while still living in it? Could a spiritual awakening survive inside the very structures it tried to dismantle? Tolstoy wrestled not just with his environment, but with his own soul. His desire to live simply clashed with his need to remain connected. His longing for truth clashed with his responsibilities as a husband and father. His vision of a better world collided day after day with the stubbornness of reality. And yet, he didn't give up. Because somewhere in the silence of those contradictions he believed, lived the spark of something pure, something eternal, something worth losing everything for. But that pursuit, so noble, so radical, was just the beginning. The real war was coming, and it would be fought not with money or words, but with love, pain, and the unbearable weight of being human. Tolstoy wanted to let go of everything, but what happens when everything includes the people you love? In his mind, the path was clear. To reach truth, to awaken spiritually, he had to renounce it all: possessions, titles, applause. But the mind, no matter how determined, does not walk alone. It carries others with it: partners, children, memories. And what Tolstoy saw as liberation, his wife Sophia saw as abandonment. She had walked every step of his journey, copied his manuscripts by hand when no one else believed in him, endured the long winters of doubt, the public scrutiny, the fire of his genius. And now, as he preached simplicity and self-erasure, she was left trying to hold a life together, a life that, whether he liked it or not, was built by both of them. To Sophia, his spiritual awakening looked like a crisis of identity. He wanted to give away the rights to his novels, works like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, which not only defined his legacy, but also fed their children, paid their staff, supported their entire estate. She pleaded with him to consider the consequences, but Tolstoy wasn't thinking in practical terms. He was chasing something deeper, something invisible. To him, wealth was not security. It was a weight pulling his soul away from light. And so the house that once echoed with ideas and love began to echo with conflict. Their arguments became storms. He saw her as a prisoner of materialism. She saw him as a man blinded by idealism, sacrificing his family on the altar of philosophy. Letters between them grew darker. Accusations, regrets, silent treatments. What was once sacred now felt fractured. But this wasn't just about marriage. It was about the deeper agony of trying to live in alignment with a truth that the world keeps denying. Tolstoy wanted to live like a peasant, but every time he stepped outside, crowds gathered. Followers knelt before him. His ideas, intended to spark compassion, began stirring discomfort in powerful places. The Russian Orthodox Church, threatened by his teachings on love without hierarchy, excommunicated him. The state watched him. Friends distanced themselves. And yet, he refused to stop. Every day, he walked a tightrope between two worlds, the ordinary and the transcendent. He was no longer a man. He had become a symbol. And that, in its own way, was another kind of prison. The more he sought freedom, the more he felt trapped. His home no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a contradiction. Sophia tried to ground him. He tried to soar above everything. But love cannot thrive where meaning pulls in opposite directions. His spiritual awakening, once a beacon of clarity, now cast shadows in every room. The tragedy was not just their fighting, it was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that creeps in when two people no longer speak the same emotional language. When one is reaching for God and the other is trying to hold onto the ground beneath them. Tolstoy found himself increasingly isolated. He stopped writing novels. His essays turned more radical, more urgent. The dream of a new humanity still burned in him, but the cost had grown unbearable. The man who once commanded rooms with his words now sat for hours in silence, staring at walls, wondering if his awakening had led him too far from those who once held his heart. And yet, he did not regret the search, because somewhere inside the pain, he still believed there was something sacred unfolding, that the friction between love and renunciation, between the world and the soul, was not a failure, but a necessary fire, one that burns the false to reveal the real. But as the inner tension escalated, a new thought began to form, a thought both terrifying and tempting. What if the only way to be free was to disappear entirely? When a man finds no peace in the world, nor in his own home, where else can he go? By the age of 82, Tolstoy was a man hollowed by paradox. He had given up almost everything: title, comfort, praise, and still, peace eluded him. His marriage had become a minefield. His ideals felt increasingly heavy. He longed for silence, not the kind you find in a quiet room, but the kind that seeps into the soul when it finally stops running. That deep, bone-level stillness that only comes when the noise of the world and the self finally dissolves. One morning in October 1910, without warning, he left. No goodbye to Sophia, no long letter to his children, just a silent exit, accompanied only by his doctor and one of his daughters. His destination? He didn't know. He wasn't looking for a place. He was looking for a state of being, a clearing, within and without. A final attempt to complete his spiritual awakening, not through theory or ritual, but through total detachment, pure surrender. He boarded a train across the Russian countryside, his aged body wrapped in coarse garments, his soul still burning with questions. He was no longer running from fame, or even from wealth. He was trying to outrun himself, the self that had been shaped by contradiction, that longed for unity but kept splitting in two, that preached love yet struggled to live it, that sought God in the soil but kept finding ego in the mirror. But the body has limits the soul cannot bargain with. The Russian winter, the strain of travel, and the weight of years brought him down. He collapsed in a remote train station called Ostapovo. Locals rushed him to a cold room, barely fit for rest, let alone death. The irony: a man who tried his whole life to escape spectacle was now dying surrounded by it. News spread like wildfire. Journalists swarmed, doctors gathered, cameras waited. The entire world came to watch a man die in silence. Sophia arrived at the station, desperate to see him one last time. But the people around Tolstoy, loyal to his suffering, blocked her. They believed she was part of the pain he had fled. And so, even in his final hours, reconciliation slipped through his fingers. And there, in that anonymous room, wrapped in blankets and paradoxes, Tolstoy died, alone. No grand cathedral, no spiritual retreat, just a wooden bed in a railway outpost. The man who preached universal love and simplicity left this world watched by strangers, not family. Surrounded by noise, not silence. But was it failure? That question still haunts those who study his life. Did he fall short of his ideals? Or did he embody them to their most painful edge? Was his final journey an escape or a sacrifice? Maybe the greatest spiritual awakening doesn't come with a halo or a gentle light. Maybe it comes as collapse, as heartbreak, as a man walking away from everything he loves, not because he stopped loving, but because he wanted to love more honestly, more purely, beyond possession, beyond identity. In that sense, Tolstoy's final act wasn't weakness. It was a kind of strength no system could contain. The strength to walk into the unknown, to risk being misunderstood, to choose the road where no one applauds and still believe in its truth. And maybe that's why we still talk about him. Not because he succeeded, but because he dared. What if Tolstoy's tragedy wasn't his lonely death, but the fact that he spent his whole life running from what might have made him truly happy? We often think of spiritual awakening as a rising, a moment of illumination, clarity, transcendence. But what if it's something far messier? What if awakening feels more like dismantling, of ego, of illusion, of identity? Tolstoy didn't find peace in a monastery. He didn't reach enlightenment on a mountaintop. His path led through mud and fire, through family conflict, public scrutiny, and emotional exile. He kept trying to align his life with his ideals, but reality kept pulling him back like a tide. He wanted to live simply, but he was complex. He wanted to love purely, but he was deeply human. And in that contradiction, he became real. His journey wasn't clean, it wasn't tidy. And maybe that's the point, because how many of us are doing the same? Wrestling with a world that rewards appearances, while craving depth, trapped between the expectations of others and the quiet truth that something inside us wants to break free. We meditate, we read, we journal, we chase the idea of a better self, but deep down, we're just trying to remember who we were before the world told us who to be. Tolstoy's life is not a lesson in perfection. It's a mirror, one that reflects the discomfort of living with conviction in a world that keeps asking us to compromise. He tried to reclaim his soul, not by escaping life, but by confronting it, fully, painfully, even foolishly. And that's why he still matters, because in him, we see the cost of authenticity, the isolation that comes when you stop playing by the rules, the ache of wanting to be both free and loved, both wild and grounded, both awake and understood. We see the fire that burns in anyone who starts asking the question, is this really all there is? And for those of us walking that same edge, for those of us who feel that quiet pull towards something more, Tolstoy whispers from the past, yes, it will cost you. Yes, it may break you. But no, you're not crazy. You're waking up. This kind of spiritual awakening is rarely glamorous. It often looks like doubt, like losing what you thought you wanted, like standing alone with your convictions while everyone else calls you lost. But in that space, between breakdown and breakthrough, something new is born. Something that no title, no bank account, no applause can touch. You. The you that's not performing. The you that's not afraid of silence. The you that doesn't need to be seen to be real. Tolstoy never fully found what he was looking for, but maybe that's the lesson. That some awakenings are not about arrival, but about movement, about refusing to settle, about staying open, even when it hurts. So the next time you feel the urge to walk away from everything, pause. Ask yourself, are you escaping, or are you answering a call? Are you breaking down or breaking free? Because somewhere in your contradictions, in your quiet rebellion, in your longing to live with truth, a new life is already taking shape. And maybe that's what Tolstoy wanted all along, not to be followed, but to remind us that the path is real, even when it's lonely, that awakening is real, even when it feels like collapse, and that we are never more alive than when we're brave enough to begin again.